All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mads channel. It's Maddie here, and welcome back to Tier List Tuesday. That's right, it's a new season, new cards, new metagame. We're going to be doing a new tier list. We do this every kind of first Tuesday after the release of a new set, and Paradox Drive is no different. I think the metagame is changing in a very interesting way. You know, regardless of whether you think this set had a profound impact on the decks and on the metagame, the reality is the meta shares for some of the decks that you're going to be seeing and the popularity of certain decks is going to be changing very dramatically. Not even, you know, just like we saw last weekend, but, you know, in this upcoming week and weekend, things are going to be changing very rapidly. So this tier list is going to be not about how well these decks have done so far this season, but how well positioned they're going to be moving forward. This is definitely like typically like a prospective tier list. I don't know the word, but basically for things moving forward. Now, what's interesting about the decks that we're going to be ranking in today's video is that there's a lot of variants of particularly popular archetypes, right? So I think we have like 4 Altaria decks in here. We've got like 3 Lucario decks, 2 Sceptile decks, 3 Blaziken decks, right? So that's kind of what we're seeing at this point in the metagame is certain archetypes are just sort of very dominant, and then there's like variations of them. We're going to be utilizing Limitless here to not only pull up the data so you guys can see, this is going to be the cumulative data so far this season, but we'll also pull up like an example of the deck list here on limitless.com as well. So if we end up featuring your deck, then, you know, shout out to you. Definitely go and register for PMPT number 34. Link to register down in the description below. The next tournament will be this Saturday, June 6th, I believe, which is crazy that it's already June, but here we are. Anyway, this tier list might have some spicy takes. The one thing you'll probably realize is that certain decks aren't here on the tier list, and that's because we kind of picked the top like 20 to 30 decks, like the most popular decks, but there's certainly some decks that are quite strong that could pop up, you know, next week and, you know, into the third week that we're not ranking here. So what I'll do is I'll do like an additional tier list probably like 2 weeks from now, whenever like ranked is out. So we'll do like a ranked tier list. But anyway, that's the intro. That's all the stipulations. Let's get right into it, guys. The first deck that we're going to talk about in no order, I guess, like they're just here in whatever order, I guess the file names are. The first one is going to be Sleep Altaria. So I have removed the old Sleep Altaria from the tier list because Sleep Altaria now plays Espeon. Now, this is the #1 most played deck so far this season, as you can see. It is almost 12% of the meta share, so nothing too crazy, but it does have a 50.62% win rate. Now, this is cumulative across the entire season so far, but as we saw last weekend at PMPT 33, it actually didn't perform very well. It really was a deck that struggled. I think all of the Sleep decks struggled particularly because of how many decks are counterplaying the Sleep strategy. Now, don't get confused because Altaria, Mega Altaria is very good. In fact, I think some of the best decks in the entire game are Mega Altaria, but I think the trend right now, at least for, you know, the near future, is that Sleep is accounted for. We have enough counterplay to Sleep. I think there's like a running joke, I guess, in the comment section that like skilled players or experienced players don't play Sleep, so that's why its win rate is low. I think realistically, there's just so many decks that actually do quite well into the Sleep strategy. Sceptile is a #1 example of that, but also Miraidon with the scoop up ability with Professor Turo. There's a lot of top decks that, you know, really just have a winning matchup spread into Altaria, or into Sleep at least. But I do think Altaria is very good. Here's just the example here. This is Mega Hassan's deck from the J Dankus Cup. You know, I don't think this is a bad deck. I think that this past weekend was a really great example of how, you know, a deck like this can certainly be hard counterplayed. But, you know, in general, when it comes to, you know, what are the best decks in the game right now, this is a deck that'll continue to be popular. It's probably going to win some tournaments. And to be fair, even though the win rate wasn't incredible, there were some people that were placed pretty high in the last few big tournaments playing this deck list. So I'm going to put it right here in the A tier. It'll probably find its way to like middle-low A tier. I do think moving forward, Sleep in general is just going to be as consistent as some of the other strategies in the game. In terms of like being able to win against the top other decks, but it's certainly still strong. We'll put it right there into the A tier. Next up, we got a couple of Blaziken decks. Let's do all of the Blazikens, I guess, because Blaziken is being played 3 different ways, coincidentally, and it is somewhat popular. It is kind of the fire-type deck. It's actually our only fire-type decks on the tier list, because people don't really play Charizard anymore. The first one is going to be Blaziken Greninja. So if we go back here to the decks so far this season, you'll see A couple of Blazikens. So Blaziken and Castform here is the most played version of Blaziken. But if we go down at the 29th most played deck is Blaziken Greninja, which coincidentally is actually a very successful deck. I think that Blaziken Greninja is a very, very strong deck, particularly maybe into some of those grass archetypes like Sceptile, which is very, very common. But I just think that Blaziken and Greninja is really strong. It's a bit of a high roll deck in terms of like getting all of the Pokemon that you need. But Pokemon Pocket nowadays, all of these decks have so much draw support. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I'm surprised we don't see more Greninja. I mean, some of these archetypes kind of farther down in the play rate are playing Greninja like Altaria, Fluttermane Greninja as an example, Dark Greninja. These are all decks on the tier list, but Blaziken Greninja here is a solid deck in the limited sample size here, 6449. That's a 55.65% win rate. I got to pull up a deck list. I got to remember to actually pull it up so you guys can see it. And I actually really like this. So we're actually playing Juliana, the top Blaziken Greninja deck of this season so far is playing Juliana, which I actually really like, right? Because we're playing a 1-1 Blaziken Greninja line, which is kind of all you need. If you really think about it, right? Double research, double copycat. We have Hiking Trail. We have Juliana in here. And if you don't know, this is a new supporter that allows you to just kind of grab a random stage 2 Pokemon from your deck. It's actually really nice. This is a smart deck in that sense. So what else is really cool here about Blaziken and Greninja is that, we're able to kind of utilize rare candies, but we're also playing middle evolutions. Chingling isn't super popular right now. The damage numbers really do add up. There's still things like Ogerpon and Comfey that protect you from status conditions, but Blaziken's 120 plus Greninja's damage, it adds up to be something quite nice. And as we know, Castform and Heatmore are going to be really, really strong options, particularly Castform into other grass type archetypes, right? Early in the game. So I like this deck. I do. I think it's actually somewhat underrated and probably deserves to see a bit more play. So we're going to put Blaziken Greninja up here in the A tier. Right now, I'm actually going to put it above Altaria. I know it hasn't seen nearly as much play, but this is certainly one of the stronger decks, especially since I do think that we're going to be seeing a lot more things like Oricorio and those lightning type decks and Sceptile moving forward. But next up, let's talk about Blaziken and Iron Moth, because again, a couple of other Blaziken decks seen play. So traditionally, or I guess the standard Blaziken deck is with Castform, but the 32nd most played deck this season is Blaziken and Iron Moth, which has gone 44 and 42. So not a terrible win rate, but it hasn't really been something that's like super common. I don't know if this will really like stick around. I don't really think that Iron Moth is like a super consistent leadoff option for Blaziken. It's sort of like a kind of a niche option, right? You kind of Iron Valiant on your bench. Iron Moth can attack for 1 fire energy, and you could get lucky with the coin flips and just 1 KO stuff. Like, it's definitely not a weak Pokemon, but it's very inconsistent. And again, it does sort of rely on the Iron Valiant stuff. But as far as like fire type Pokemon go that you can pair with Mega Blaziken, it's really probably not that bad. It's, there's a reason why people are playing it. A lot of these future Pokemon and ancient Pokemon have that same sort of feel to me, where they're like definitely not bad at all. It's just that some of them fit into certain archetypes better than others. But yeah, Iron Moth Blaziken, it's not terrible. I think I would rather just be playing like the Greninja variant, because it's probably just better if you're going to be investing like a bench hitting card into your deck list. Like, I think you'd probably just rather play Greninja. It's just better. But I think inherently the coin flips make this a little bit sketchy. It does have like a 50% win rate, but again, the sample size is pretty low. So for Iron Moth Blaziken, I'll put a B tier. I'll put it like a high B tier. I do think the only and best Blaziken deck is going to be with Greninja, and that'll go into the A tier. But let's talk about Castform Blaziken, because we have a bit of a larger sample size for this deck list. It's the 19th most played deck this season, 105 to 112 so far. That's a 47% win rate. Really not incredible. Let's take a look here at One Ram's deck. He went 9-1. And again, like here, like we're playing Cabbie as well, which is cool. So we're playing 1 Hiking Trail, 1 Mesagosa, and then the Cabbie to grab our stadium cards. It's somewhat niche. Like Blaziken Castform is such a straightforward deck. It's not bad to any stretch of the imagination, but at the same vein, like this is a deck that's entirely reliant on burn. So if you're playing a deck that just sort of can counter burn, or if you're not, I guess going up against a grass deck that's weak to fire, Castform in general isn't like that strong. It's just 50 damage, but it's pretty easily KOable. So, I think this is a fine deck. Like, as far as all of the decks go in Pokemon Pocket in this current meta, it's totally fine. The fire type just needs a little bit better Pokemon, or just something new, I guess, to refresh the fire archetype. But, I don't hate Blaziken. It's definitely kind of found its way into the metagame, other than being super fraudulent early last season. But again, I really think the Greninja variant is the best way to play Blaziken. This one I'll put like B tier. Actually, I'm just going to put it C tier, because I do think the Iron Moth version is probably just better, which is crazy to say, but maybe not. I mean, maybe they're just both B. I mean, it's not terrible. Yeah, I mean, we'll save the C tier for like, we have a lot of decks in here that probably aren't that good. But most of these decks are quite good though, which is crazy. We'll put the other Blazikens in the B tier, but I think Blaziken Greninja is the best currently. But let's talk about one of the more interesting decks so far this season, which is going to be Great Tusk Koraidon. Tuskdon, I guess is the term for it. Now, this deck list is seeing a little bit of play. It's the 22nd most played deck so far this season, but it does not have a great win rate. In fact, it's amongst some of the lowest out of all of the decks this season. But if you look, all of the lowest win rates out of all of these decks so far this season are, in fact, fighting type decks. So I think it's more of a result of fighting type, and being weak to psychic is a really, really bad thing for like most decks right now. And it's tough because the other fighting type cards that aren't weak to psychic are weak to grass. So, you know, if you're a fighting type deck right now, you're definitely struggling with all of these Altaria and Sceptile seeing play. But let's talk about the progression of the metagame, because based around the results and kind of just the typical trends that we're seeing moving forward, I think that these lightning type decks with Miraidon and Magnezone are really going to define the metagame. And yes, there's still going to be some Altaria seeing play, even though it's less sleep, probably more Gourgeist. The thing about these fighting decks is that, and particularly Great Tusk Koraidon, is that they're incredibly strong into really any matchup that isn't just hitting it for weakness, right? So just for an example here, I'm going to show you the matchups here, because it's kind of hilarious. So 3 and 15 into Sleep Altaria, and these are its most common matchups. And then 1 and 10 into Altaria Gourgeist. So these are like virtually auto losses for Great Tusk and Koraidon. However, very solid win rates across the board into basically everything else. Really decent into Sceptile, and really, really good into these lightning decks. So I actually think that these fighting type archetypes are pretty well positioned to be like totally solid in the metagame. The only downside to me, of course, is that, you know, there's still going to be a lot of psychic seeing play, but there's a really, there's an imbalance in that like triangulation rock, paper, scissors that is forming at the metagame, at the top of the metagame right now, which is of course Altaria, the lightning decks, and then these fighting decks. And I think that the fighting decks really just got the short end of the stick early on this season because there was so much sleep and so much Altaria that they really struggled. But I really think that they are kind of that third piece to the Triforce that is lightning, psychic, and fighting, right? Like, these fighting decks are going to beat the lightning decks actually very consistently, but lose very consistently to the Altaria deck. So it's just sort of a weird dynamic. I think that Great Tusk and Koraidon specifically is actually the best way to play a deck around Koraidon. I think Great Tusk is extremely strong. It's a very, very strong deck, except the thing is here, and if you look at the strategy, we're playing Starting Plains, we're playing Ancient Booster Capsule, and Lucky Ice Pop, right, with Great Tusk. So this brings Great Tusk to 180 HP. Lucky Ice Pop is going to keep it alive for a long time. However, you know, that extra HP and even the healing doesn't matter that much if Pokemon are just being able to hit us for, you know, instead of like 40 damage every turn, now they're hitting us for 60, or Gourgeist, you know, for example, can hit us for like 100 damage. So being weak to Psychic in some of those matchups really is a massive detriment to Great Tusk. And Koraidon, even though with the booster capsule, you're not going to get one KO'd by Altaria or anything, Great Tusk could very easily get KO'd by a Mega Altaria on turn 2, especially if you don't find the booster energy. So in general, I think that this is actually a very, very strong deck list. I just don't think it's very well positioned into some of the more popular decks, being, of course, those psychic type decks. So we're going to go ahead and give this a very solid ranking of like high B tier. I actually think this is a stronger deck than like Blaziken and Iron Moth and Blaziken and Castform. I actually kind of want to put this deck into the A tier, but I don't know. It's kind of a tough call, right? Because if overwhelmingly the majority of the decks that are going to be seeing play in tournaments in the upcoming tournaments are these lightning type decks, then this is actually going to be a very strong choice. You could see the win rates for some of these fighting type decks absolutely flip like completely given just a couple of days. You know, it could have a 40% win rate in this first week, and in the second week, it'll have a 60% win rate, and then it'll even out. But I think this is a deck that moving forward is actually going to be a really strong choice. I think the downside there is that people are just going to move off of Sleep Altaria and play like Gourgeist Altaria, which is also kind of an auto lose for this matchup. So I think high B tier is probably a fine placement. We'll see if any of the fighting type decks can find their way into you know, like the A tier spot. It's going to be tough. Not only do we have Altaria, but these future Toolbox decks are going to continue to see play as well. So that's another factor. So we'll kind of just put it right here in like the high B tier. Still a very strong deck. If you're not playing Psychic and you queue up into Great Tusk, like you're probably not feeling very great. You're just like, okay, like this is kind of broken, because it is. It's very strong. But you know, if you are playing Psychic, you're like, oh, okay, this is somewhat easy. You know what I mean? And Gourgeist, I think, has more HP than, so Tusk can't even KO Gourgeist. Like, it's a crazy matchup. All of this, like, Espeon as well has 90. So, like, Espeon and Gourgeist are just complete direct counters to Great Tusk, which is really tough. But otherwise, an incredibly strong Pokemon. But let's talk about the Iron Valiant archetypes. Now, I have kind of condensed this just into like one, because there's this version here, which is Iron Valiant and Iron Crown, and then there's this version here with Double Boulder, which actually has a much higher win rate, coincidentally, but this is the 11th most played deck, and this is the 16th most played deck. I'll actually take an example here, because here are the most popular, or I guess the highest win rate version is actually not playing Iron Leaves, just playing Double Boulder, which is interesting. But yeah, this deck list, I think, again, is certainly not a bad deck. It's a deck that I actually have been very surprised by this season. You know, you have, of course, Turo and you have Palazzo, so it's very kind of swap aroundable, very flexible in terms of the Pokemon that you're having in the active spot. You know, Iron Boulder is a pretty strong Pokemon just outright. Like 140 is a good amount of damage, especially for a basic, you know, single prize Pokemon, and Iron Crown is nothing to scoff about either. So I do like this deck. And again, it's just sort of in a weird position because, you know, there's not a ton of like dark type decks in the metagame, and it doesn't really matter anyway because these Pokemon are getting 1-hit KO'd by anything strong regardless, you know what I mean? I do think if Zoroark kind of comes in and is a little bit more popular, I think Zoroark is kind of the #1 dark type deck example this season. This deck, you know, might be a little bit shy of that matchup, but into most things, it actually doesn't feel very bad at all. And like I said, guys, like the win rate here is very impressive. 150 to 123 for Iron Valiant, Iron Boulder. This Iron Crown version is 162, 162, so it's just a 50-50 so far this season, which, you know, isn't bad, like, at all. But I do think that the more refined version, or I guess the most successful version so far this season, is just going to be the Double Boulder variant. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of condense those just into one archetype. And honestly, I think this is an A-tier deck. I think I'm going to put it A-tier for now. It's probably going to be on the lower spectrum of A-tier. I'm going to actually put it, you know what? Do I put it above Sleep Altaria? I mean, it's performing better. But no, we'll put it just like right here. These three decks are honestly pretty close together. But we'll try to keep the tiers in order. Left is high on the tier, right is low on the tier, basically. But anyway, that's kind of how I feel about the future Toolbox deck. It's just, I think, impressing basically everybody. So shout out to Iron Valiant. Next up is going to be Gambit, or Glimmora and Kingambit, you know, which is the 17th most played deck this season. Definitely a fun deck list, but, you know, inherently it is a coin flip deck, and I think it struggles greatly in comparison to some of the other single prize archetypes that we have, particularly like the Iron Valiant stuff, right? Like, if you look at the win rates, I mean, 93 to 126 so far this season means that this deck list is probably going to completely fall out of play. It's just going to be a deck that just doesn't really see play moving forward, and I think it's a totally fine deck. But, you know, if you're going to be playing this like dark type Toolbox deck, you probably just want to play Zoroark. It's more consistent. It's just a better deck. But it's a really fun strategy. And honestly, like, I really like that they added this to the game, and I find it to be very fun. Honestly, the main issue that I have with this deck is that I feel like I want to definitely play like Bombardier so that I can kind of get Pawniard out of the active spot. But even if I do, you know, I have to draw into Glimmora and, you know, make sure that I can kind of get into Glimmora before my opponent is just going to put too much pressure on me. Oftentimes on turn 2 or turn 3, Glimmora is just going to get 1-hit KO'd. And it's like, cool, like, sure, like if Glimmora gets KO'd, you know, and they don't take any points, like that's cool. You know what I mean? Like we like that. But it's also poison. And, you know, as we know, there's a lot of status condition counterplay in the metagame. And again, if you go first, sometimes you feel like you're just not really even able to have enough energies to get into Kingambit. And if that Glimmora does go down, you know, on turn 2 or turn 3, are we going to have a second Glimmora? The deck just isn't fast enough for, I think, what the greater metagame looks like. However, it is kind of funny to go into Kingambit and hit for like 220 damage, but it doesn't happen all that often. So, you know, at the end of the day, this is definitely not a terrible deck, but I think what's sad to me is that compared to really everything else on this tier list, you know, it's going to go into the D tier. I think it is sort of that D tier representation early on this season, which, you know, there's got to be some deck that's a D tier deck. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the reality of it. You know, these are all of the best decks in the entire game. So if you're the worst of the best decks, then, you know, That's just sort of where it goes. So I think D tier is a proper placement for this deck. 41% win rate. Definitely a bit of a struggle. Let's get into Altaria and Iron Valiant, right? So let's take a look here. So there's like 4 different Altaria decks seeing play this season. If we go down right here, the 21st most played deck is Mega Altaria and Iron Valiant, which has gone 116 to 88, which is a 55% win rate, which is very impressive. I mean, to be honest with you, I think this is definitely kind of the type of deck just kind of getting carried by Mega Altaria, which is fine because Mega Altaria is so strong, but it's really not bad. You know, I don't know if this is like better than Gourgiest to me, but it's certainly better than Sleep, or has been performing better than Sleep so far this season. Altaria is one of those decks that it's hard to kind of play it as like a really high upside Pokemon, right? It's just a very low downside Pokemon. It's consistent, you know, it's just 130, 190 HP, super easy to get it going. And it's an impressive Pokemon, but certain strategies feel like they can kind of overwhelm Altaria, other than maybe the Greninja Altaria version, which is like the high roll version. But this is, I mean, I think that's why we see these Altaria decks have such high win rates, is because they're so consistent, you know? And like double Plaza, you know, double Crown, double Valiant, it's a really, really solid strategy, one that I really like. I really like it. You know, it's just a good deck. But again, it's a little bit too similar, and I think a little bit too straightforward than, you know, Gourgeist Altaria, which can kind of utilize things like, you know, Chingling, and it can play also on top of Gourgeist, you can play Comfey and Jirachi. So it's more of like a toolbox deck. The future variant Mega Altaria is sort of a straightforward deck. The sample size is a lot smaller, which is why I think its win rate's higher. But certainly a strong deck list. Not S tier in my mind, but this is actually better than the other decks I think that we have here in the A tier. I do think if you're playing the future Valiant decks, it's probably best to just play it with Altaria. Like, that's kind of the downside of having Altaria in the metagame, is that a lot of these psychic packages are just sort of better if you play them with Altaria. You know what I mean? Like, the sleep stuff would be not that good if Altaria wasn't in the deck. As we see, Iron Valiant can't hold its own without Altaria, but it probably is just better to play Altaria with it. But anyway, a high A tier is probably where this deck's going to fall. Next up, we got Fluttermane. And the thing is about these psychic decks, like when you're playing Altaria and you're not actually playing Sleep, there's not a lot of like great counterplays to it in the metagame, right? Like, what are we really afraid of? What's interesting is that you will see we have Mega Scizor here on the tier list, which is starting to see a ton more play because Altaria is so dominant this season, but there's really not a lot of metal type decks that are like super prominent in the metagame. So Altaria really feels like it can kind of come in and just sort of do its thing without worrying much, which is crazy. Anyway, high A tier. Next up is going to be Fluttermane. Flutter Snipe is what we're going to call this. Fluttermane and Greninja. Unfortunately, this is the 26th most played deck this season, and it has the worst win rate by far, which is a 36.89%. That's 38 to 63. Now, the issue with Fluttermane is that it's just not a good Pokemon. Like, I don't know how else to explain it to people. I tried to tell people like before the season came out, but like, there's just never really a reason to play Fluttermane other than if you're playing like a, I guess like a, what's it, like a Lunala EX deck, like a weird psychic bounce deck. Maybe something with like Gardevoir could be an example. But those are strategies that just they're not in the metagame. They're not popular, right? So Fluttermane really feels like it was built to kind of buff an archetype that just isn't really needed. You know what I mean? Like, sure, you can come in, hit for 70, get the trainer lock down, but then you're just going to have to retreat anyway. And like, if you were going to do that, like, wouldn't you just rather hit for like 150 with like a Mewtwo or whatever? Fluttermane has a lot of problems. The number one way that people have tried to build decks around Fluttermane has been with Greninja. But as we know, like, this particular strategy of playing Fluttermane, playing a Pokemon and then Chingling and Greninja is pretty common, but there's so many better ways to do it. There's just so many better like Pokemon you could play in place of Greninja. Like, Darkrai would be better. Giratina would be better. Mimikyu would be better than this. So like, Fluttermane here just doesn't really have a home. It's not, I guess, that it's a terrible Pokemon. There's just not really a strategy that utilizes it effectively. And there's really no reason to play this particular psychic type basic EX Pokemon when you could just play Mimikyu or Giratina, which are just effectively better in like basically every scenario. So, you know, we did put Gambit into the D tier, but this is even worse. This is the bottom of the barrel decks in terms of things that have seen play this season. These are decks that you should not play, and they should just not continue to see any play as the season goes on. And that's really how I feel about them. To be honest, Gambit's probably a lot better than this, but whatever. They're both going to go D tier. Next up, we've got Lucario. Now, there are, I guess, 3 different Lucario decks, so we'll just cover them all right now. Let's just do it. Let's go in order. So the most popular version of Lucario is going to be just sort of fighting Toolbox Lucario. This is Mega Lucario. And so far this season, people are playing it with Koraidon. And again, I don't really think Koraidon is needed in this deck list. Like, it's tough because I think that, you know, Lucario with like things like Hitmonlee, Zygarde, Hitmontop, Hitmonchan, whatever you're going to play as these sort of fighting type basic Pokemon to lead off your game. I think all of that is fine. Like, it's just like Lucario was last season with Hitmontop or whatnot. It's just now that we have Koraidon, the question is it even worth it to play Koraidon in this deck, right? Like, the Great Tusk deck is built around Koraidon, so it makes sense to play it. Whereas a deck like this, we already have Mega Lucario as our closing Pokemon. And sure, you know, Koraidon could be, you know, an additional closing Pokemon, but all you're doing is just giving yourself the opportunity, 1 out of 5 chance here to like lead off with Koraidon, which is really terrible. So I just don't really think Koraidon makes a lot of sense in these Lucario decks. That's my opinion. Maybe it does like objectively make the deck a little bit better, but at the end of the day, everything fighting has struggled tremendously because of all of the Psychic and whatnot in the metagame. The 8th most played deck here, 45% win rate. That's 197 to 234. I honestly don't even feel better about this version than I would just like fighting Lucario down here with Hitmontop and without Koraidon. Like, this actually has a higher win rate. Actually has a winning win rate, theoretically, 134 to 132, which is pretty funny. So you know what? Like, Lucario, let's do this because I've broken this out into 3 strategies. This image probably doesn't make a lot of sense because it has the non-EX Lucario, and I don't know if the Hitmon decks play it, but let's break it into 3 categories. We've got fighting Lucario with Koraidon, we have fighting Lucario without Koraidon, and then we have fighting or sleep Lucario. Those are like the 3 Lucario archetypes in my mind. So the first one is going to be Lucario with Koraidon, which again just isn't very good. I'm going to put it B tier. I'm actually going to put it like below Great Tusk. I really just don't think it's that good. It's just not worth playing. That being said, fighting Lucario here without Koraidon is probably just objectively better. And at least you are going to be somewhat strong into those fighting type decks, or sorry, those lightning type decks. And you can hold your own into other things like Sceptile potentially, or Suicune, or, you know, Hydreigon, like whatever you're, you know, whatever we're kind of, Zoroark. So like fighting Lucario and fighting in general is still strong. It's just, you're going to have to probably lose to all of these Altaria decks, which are seeing a ton of play. But I think that the best Lucario variant is going to be just the normal fighting Lucario here. And I'll just pull up an example of that, which is going to be like here, Lucario and Hitmontop. And again, like just the exact same decks as it was last season. Like there's nothing here. Like the only thing that you would potentially add to this archetype from this new season is Koraidon. And playing Great Tusk is fine, but it doesn't, like, you wouldn't play Great Tusk without Koraidon. Like Great Tusk is there to be played with Koraidon, and it doesn't make sense to play Tusk with things like Lucario. So like, of course, if you're playing Lucario, you're going to play the other fighting Pokemon like Hitmontop, Hitmonlee, you know, Zygarde, things like that. You know what I mean? And again, I think it's also pretty fine. So I consider this deck probably better than Great Tusk, just maybe in terms of consistency, but I think both of the different like core fighting strategies are actually like totally fine. But here, like, yeah, fighting Lucario, we're going to put it, I mean, honestly, I don't even know if I want to put this A tier. I'll put it B tier. How about this? I'll put it B tier, and we'll just sort of put all of the fighting decks like in order. Top of B tier is where I'm going to put normal fighting Lucario, and then Great Tusk, and then Koraidon Lucario. This deck doesn't make any sense, so I wouldn't play it. To be honest, these fighting decks aren't even that bad. They just cannot really beat Altaria well. But then lastly is going to be Sleep Lucario, which is still a deck list. So here, the 18th most played deck is Sleep Lucario, 64 and 89. So the issue is when you're playing Sleep Lucario, not only are you probably just going to lose to those like other psychic type decks because you're a fighting deck, but you're also going to lose to some of these grass type decks that can counter Sleep quite well. So that's why Sleep Lucario here has a 41% win rate this season, 64 and 89. So again, it's just a really, really bad meta call so far in this sort of season. I'm going to put Sleep Lucario just at the bottom. I don't even know. Like, I guess we'll put it B tier because it's probably just better than C tier. But that's sort of my ranking of the fighting type decks, like if I were to play them, right? So just straight Lucario, straight Koraidon, and then the mix is below them, and then Sleep Lucario is just definitely not very good. It's just objectively worse than Sleep Altaria, which also has kind of struggled this season. Honestly, I wouldn't put too much weight into like these different fighting archetypes. Like, to be honest, like you just play Mega Lucario or you play Koraidon. You don't try to mix them together. And Sleep right now is definitely just sort of on the out as far as like Lucario decks go. That could change, but as we know, Sleep's being heavily counterplayed. Are these Blaziken decks better than some of these fighting Lucario decks? I mean, like probably, which is pretty funny because win rate wise, they definitely are. So let's do this. Let's put Lucario in between the two fighting decks and then the two bad fighting decks. How about that? They're definitely all just sort of B tier, which is like they're just not either that good or there's better options or they're just not well positioned. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how the B tier rolls. I wouldn't concern yourself too much with where these decks are on the tier list. But anyway, moving forward, we have Terrapagos and Altaria, which is I think the most popular way people are playing Terrapagos, right? Did we highlight Sleep Lucario? Yeah, I think we did. But anyway, if we didn't, I apologize. Where is Terrapagos? Right here. So the 27th most played deck, the most popular version of Terrapagos is Altaria and Terrapagos, which, you know, is 56 and 56. A very respectable performance. However, people are going to point out that the Lagoon Serenity format tournaments are definitely skewing the data here, and they do. So if you're going to comment that, for sure, it's just these are like non-standard format tournaments that list themselves as standard format tournaments. So if you're watching this and you know anybody from the Lagoon Serenity format, like shout out to them. I love the tournament series, but just tell them to not list their tournament as standard format if you can, because it does just sort of mess up the data. Because as we see, the two highest placements here for our Altaria and Terrapagos are from the Lagoon Serenity format, but here at the Umbreon Clash, one went 6 and 3. You know, and this is not a bad deck. It's kind of Daycare, Terrapagos, and Altaria. It's fine. I do think that there's like potentially like like more of a reason to play something like Kangaskhan EX, Mega Kangaskhan, or even Arceus EX because of the ability to not be affected by status conditions. But Terrapagos does have a decent amount of HP for a basic. It's got a 150. You can put a giant cape on this thing and it goes up to, you know, 170. But also like a deck like this plays Magby, Pichu, Mantike, so fire, electric, and water. But then you're playing 3 other energy types out of your energy zone, like Steel, Psychic, and Dark. So theoretically speaking, you can get, you know, that 4, 5, or 6 energy types onto Terrapagos, and it can 1-hit KO stuff. So like that's the big upside of playing this. It's like a weird kind of mix between something like a Kangaskhan and an Arceus, but it's a 2-prize Pokemon. And then Dragon Arcana, Altaria is consistently a strong Pokemon. It's just a really, really decent Pokemon. But again, you know, I look at this deck list and I think to myself, is there actually a reason to play this above just other things? You know, sure, if you wanted to play something new, something different, if you were just into the Daycare decks, this is, you know, this is kind of what Daycare looks like right now. But at the same time, I don't really consider this to be like a top tier strategy, you know, but it's really not bad at all. Like considering all of the possible decks that you could play currently with all of the cards in Pokemon Pocket, like this is definitely not bad. But to me, it is going to just kind of fall right here, like into, I'm going to put it between the Blaziken variants. It's just a total like B tier deck to me. It's definitely not terrible, not great. And it's just B tier. You know, a lot of decks are kind of B tier. That's always how our tier lists sort of end up. At least a lot of the decks that we've been covering so far have been in the B tier, but shout out to Terrapagos. Because again, you know, if I put decks in the B tier, that doesn't mean they're like terrible. Like, to be honest, these are all of the best decks in the game. So, you know, if I put a deck in the B tier, that means it's honestly pretty solid as far as like the greater scheme of things. But let's break outside of this sort of mediocrity that we've been ranking here, because we're going to get into the top of the metagame right now. That being, of course, these Magnezone variants. So let's just cover the and then we'll go into Sceptile. In fact, all of these decks lined up here are about to be at the very top. So anyway, what's interesting about Magnezone, and I'll highlight this real quick, is that it's being broken up into several different categories. So here we see there's Miraidon Magnezone, which is when you're playing double Miraidon in your Magnezone deck. There's Magnezone and Miraidon, which is when you're playing a single Miraidon in your Magnezone deck. And then there's Magnezone EX and Magnezone, which is when you're playing Magnezone EX to some degree into your Magnezone deck. All of these decks probably are playing at least one Oricorio, but they're all virtually very, very similar. Now you'll notice that none of these decks have like tremendously high win rates. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's probably just fine. Like, it's okay because ties are included. So if you look at Miraidon Magnezone, it's 547 to 524, which is actually a pretty good win rate. It just has 22 ties because you're playing like Oricorio and whatnot. And then here, 460 to 428. So also a really solid win rate. And then if we go down here, this one is 286 to 273. So they're all positive win rates, even though because if they equate the ties, sort of their win rates aren't like super high above 50%, but these are all, in my mind, the best decks in the entire game, basically. So let's talk about them a little bit. The first one here let's talk about is going to be Magnezone and Miraidon, okay, which is the third most played deck. Let's pull up an example here, and this is going to be the example that won our PMPT 33 tournament this past weekend. We're entering in a very strange sort of like time in the Pokemon Pocket metagame, because now that they've given us Miraidon, they've now buffed the traditional Magnezone or Oricorio archetype to be potentially like not only just like the best deck in the game, or one of the best decks, because Magnezone and Oricorio was always one of the more solid strategies no matter the season, but now it's just like literally like one of the strongest decks, which is kind of a crazy thing. And I can't remember when an Oricorio base deck was at the very, very top of the metagame. It's going to very dramatically change sort of how people choose to play decks, or I guess which decks are viable, because now like when 30% of a tournament is going to be playing Oricorio, it's a really strange thing. And Miraidon is an absolutely broken Pokemon in this archetype, so it's kind of unprecedented. We've never really seen this type of dominance from like a lightning type deck. This might be the strongest Magnezone and Oricorio has ever been, ever since this archetype came into the game over a year ago. So it's kind of crazy that we're here right now. But let's just kind of talk about this, because in general, I think a lot of people are curious, like, which is better, right? Like, which version of Magnezone and Miraidon should I be playing? This version here, as we just pulled up with, of course, one Miraidon, to me is sort of more about like a legacy Magnezone deck. So you're not really compromising anything with the traditional strategy. Double Mirror Shot Mag, double Oricorio, and that in itself is going to be enough to win a lot of matchups. And now you just have the Miraidon to win games. And I think it's a bit more consistent, because Miraidon's not really something you want in the active spot, which is why when you see double Miraidon, you do see double Turo as well. Now, keep in mind, I do think, and what we're going to do here, I guess we'll just rank it. This is going S tier. Okay. So even just one Miraidon, this is top of the top at the moment. I think even just adding one Miraidon to Magnezone or Oricorio makes the deck substantially better. So it's going to go into the S tier. But let's talk about double Miraidon and Magnezone, okay? Let's just talk about it. Because it is different and it plays differently, right? So this is the kind of a version playing double Miraidon. Now, this particular example from PMPT 33 this past weekend played only one Magnezone and one Oricorio. Now, the tricky part about doing this is, of course, if you play double Miraidon and you play double Turo, then, you're kind of really focused around the Miraidon strategy, which is fine, because Miraidon is so strong. I don't think that this makes the deck worse objectively. In fact, I actually think double Miraidon, double Turo makes this entire deck actually stronger, because Miraidon is one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. So we're still playing double Magneton. We still have an Oricorio in there. The way that I look at double Miraidon versus single Miraidon on the tier list is that effectively double Miraidon is in fact the strongest deck, right? Because I think it's just the best. However, into a deck playing double Oricorio and double Magnezone, it's actually going to be disadvantageous, right? Because we only have one Magnezone to deal with our opponent's Oricorio. So if our opponent puts in an Oricorio, we bring in our Magnezone to KO that Oricorio, but then Miraidon KOs our only Magnezone, then we no longer have any Magnezones to deal with that second Oricorio, and Oricorio is going to wall Miraidon, right? So basically, double Miraidon into virtually everything else in the metagame is better. However, single Miraidon with double Oricorio is going to be better in this head-to-head matchup between Miraidons. And I think we saw that reflected in grand finals. So, again, it's however you really want to distribute this. I think, like, in general, they're both the S tier decks. If you wanted to be better into the greater field, play double Miraidon. But if you wanted to win the mirror matchup more consistently, play single Miraidon or double Oricorio or double Magnezone, however you want to do it. Maybe you just play 2-2-2. I don't know. If you have the space for it, probably not. But either way, these are two S tier decks. And again, in the head-to-head, this one is better than this one. But into basically everything else, as we see down here, this version is going to be better. So I'm just going to put this S tier because it's objectively stronger, but this actually does beat this version. So that's how I'm explaining that. But these are the two best decks in the game. These are objectively the best decks in the game. But let's talk about the Magnezone here with EX, Magnezone EX, because there is a third version, the sixth most played deck. Now, I think this is the worst of the three, but let's pull up an example here. And this is going to be one Magnezone EX with double Oricorio, and then just one Miraidon. So instead of playing double, just single price Magnezone, we've now incorporated a Magnezone EX in here. And the reason why I think objectively this version is worse is because that Magnezone EX is worth 2 points, and so is Miraidon. So if you're going to be utilizing Miraidon in these decks, you either just sort of want Miraidon to have to get KO'd twice, or your opponent has to go through double Miraidon, or not. But what you also really want to do is go 1-1-2 in terms of the prize math, right? So, like, basically, you want your opponent to give 3 Pokemon throughout this, whether that's a double Oricorio and then Miraidon, or double Magnezone and then Miraidon, whatever it is. But keep in mind, when you're playing Magnezone, then all of a sudden, if your opponent goes through an Oricorio, then if your only option is Magnezone EX, then all they have to do is go through one more Pokemon to win, right? So then they can just go 1-2 on the prize math. So objectively, I think the more EX Pokemon you play in this deck actually does make it worse. And I think people are going to continue to play Oricorio in this archetype no matter what. And I think in most cases, the non-EX Magnezone is in fact just better. And since we are already including the new Miraidon because it's a 2-prize Pokemon, you probably just want to cut Magnezone EX entirely. I do think there's a world where maybe we play like an entirely 2-prize version of Miraidon. Maybe without Oricorio, we just play double Magnezone EX and double Miraidon, so your opponent is forced to go 2-2 on the prize math, which maybe is actually quite good. But I think Oricorio is going to be around to stay, particularly for the mirror matchup, right? So, and I think that version would just lose to Oricorio, right? So, this, in my opinion, this version of Magnezone is objectively the lesser of all three of these. Like, I just don't really think you need to play Magnezone EX is kind of what I'm getting at. I'm going to put it right here into the A tier. I'm going to put it above Blaziken, but I'm going to put it below this Altaria. It's definitely a very strong deck, but not as good as just these other two versions that aren't playing Magnezone EX, right? Just you got to be a little bit smarter with the prize math, basically, is all it comes down to. We have no decks in the C tier at the moment, which is pretty funny, but that might change. Okay, so let's get into Sceptile now, because now we just sort of covered the Miraidon stuff. Sceptile should be, I think in my estimation, the most successful strategy this season. And I do believe that's the case. So Sceptile split up really into like 3 different versions, which I think is fine. Whether you're playing Ogerpon, like it's weird. The Limitless doesn't really deal with Sceptile very well because like this version playing Ogerpon basically is the Pheromosa version, but there's a Pheromosa version down here that isn't playing Ogerpon, and then there's this version which sometimes plays Ogerpon, sometimes doesn't, but is typically categorized as Sceptile because of just the overall composition of the deck, which typically plays Chingling and Grovyle. So I know that's confusing, but we're going to break Sceptile into 2 main packages or categories, because I really think at the core, whether you're playing Ogerpon or not, there's 2 ways that people are playing Sceptile. And the first one is going to be with Chingling, which is this one, okay? So I'll break it down easy for you. This is the 4th most played deck, and it's 488 to 381, which is absolutely incredible. 55% win rate or more, basically, if you don't count the ties. Now, this is the best deck currently so far this season, and it's absolutely broken. Not only is it playing Chingling, but it plays Quick Growth Extract and Fragrant Forest and no rare candies, so you're not reliant on things like, of course, or rare candy. So if you get Chingling locked, that's the upside. Ogerpon's gonna be really good into sleep. It's super consistent. This deck in general is much better into sleep. People have figured out that just having multiple evolution tiers is in fact better, because every time you evolve, you don't have to be put to sleep, right? And Grovyle can just sort of KO, an Igglybuff and whatnot. And they have a decent amount of HP, especially with Leaf Cape. We've got Erica's in here. Not even playing PCL. We're just playing Erica for the 2 extra HP points of healing, which is good because, again, we're playing Ogerpon in the middle evolution, so we don't really need that. And in general, I think Sceptile is just broken. I think it's just super, super, super good. Good for so many reasons. One, it's grass type, so you can kit for weakness on all of these dark type decks. You are weak to fire, and there's not much fire in the game other than Blaziken, so you're kind of safe on that front. You have Chingling item lock included. You have bench damage with Grovyle. We have the non-EX Mega Sceptile here, or the non-Mega EX Sceptile with Leaf Blade to just KO Oricorios quite easily. Ogerpon, like I said, to counter sleep, but also a really great secondary attacking option. And then we just have Sceptile. And the whole deck is incredibly consistent with things like Quick Growth Extract and Fragrant Forest, which are massive advantages to the grass archetype that other decks literally just don't have. So again, reviewing the data and its performances so far this season, I think that Sceptile is incredibly good. I actually think the highest placing Sceptile this past weekend was the Pheromosa version, but this to me is S tier. This is going to be a top tier deck. Not only is it going to be really good into sleep stuff, but I think other than Blaziken, it's just really, really safe. And even into Blaziken, it's not even that bad because we're not playing Pheromosa, we're playing Chingling and whatnot. I really like Sceptile. I think it's a top tier strategy. But let's talk about here the other version of Sceptile, which here is categorized as Sceptile and Ogerpon. But if we go into the example here, you'll see that this is going to be a different version where you are, of course, playing Pheromosa and you're not playing Chingling. But we could also pull up an example down here, which is going to be, where is it? Like the 34th most played version, which also has a great win rate. And this is going to be just double Pheromosa and Sceptile. This one plays rare candy instead of Extract and Grovyle. But basically, it's about like Leaf lead off. So are you playing Chingling or are you playing Pheromosa? Like that's to me the core differences here in terms of how the deck's going to flow. I think Pheromosa is very, very good. I think the only downside to playing Pheromosa is that if you do run into that Castform or Iron Moth lead, you're probably just going to lose because, you know, Pheromosa only has 70 HP and it does just go down to some of those fire type leadoff Pokemon. We saw that last season. It was a kind of a big reason why people swapped away from Pheromosa was because Blaziken was so strong. But that being said, I think that the Pheromosa version is also really, really good. I think it's very good. I guess so. This version is 168 to 150, so that's a 52% win rate. And then down here in a small sample size, 48 to 36, which is a 56% win rate. And I think a lot of these decks are just sort of carried by the fact that Sceptile is so good and the grass package is so strong. I guess if I had to put one above the other, I do think the Chingling version is better because shout out to Chingling, but this deck is still incredibly strong. I'm going to put this like top of A tier. I think that Sceptile in general is really strong, but if I had to, you know, separate them, I would say this one's better. And because I think, you know, we already have a Sceptile deck in S tier, this one I'll just separate them by putting it in A tier. That's kind of how I feel about it. But it's still incredibly strong. This could very well just be S tier. And again, it did place higher at our tournament this past weekend. But you know what? We'll just put it in top of A tier because I think that's totally fine, I think. But yeah, anything in the A tier is really, really good. Could easily win at any point in time. But anyway, that's Sceptile for you. Incredibly strong. Let's get into Altaria now. There's two other Altaria variants we've yet to talk about. So let's try to move a little bit quickly here. The first one's going to be Gourgiest Altaria. Okay, Gourgiest Altaria. So let's take a look here. The 7th most played deck this season. 316 to 259. That's a 54% win rate, basically. I think that this is also probably the best deck, or one of the best decks in the entire game. Not only are you just hard beating basically anything that's fighting type and weak to psychic, which is always a really big deal, but we have Comfey and Chingling here, which are just two incredible Pokemon given the landscape of the metagame. Gourgeist is going to be super nice into just a bunch of stuff. It's also what was I going to say? It's also, Gourgeist is just really solid into like lightning. I think this entire deck does better into lightning than the sleep version does, mostly because Gourgeist can just easily KO, just like the Iron Valiant version. Like you can just KO Oricorio really easily, so you don't really have to worry about that per se. I think that the two like top dogs, actually there's three because I do consider Sceptile like a top deck this season, but I think if you had to break this season down so far and probably moving forward, the two top dogs are going to be Miraidon, Magnezone, and then Altaria, Gourgeist. Like those are just in general the best overall decks. They're consistent, they're strong, have a lot of options. And Altaria, again, will always be one of the more consistent decks in the game. So you know what? Gourgeist, Altaria, we're going to put it S tier. I'm going to actually put it above Sceptile is where we're going to put it. And you know what? Do we want to include both Miraidon decks in the S tier? You know what? Now that being said, I'm going to put the double Miraidon just top of A tier. One, because again, like I like to segment very similar archetypes by, by different tiers, right? So we did the same thing with Sceptile. We broke them out, and same with Altaria. So we're going to do the same thing here. Like we're going to just do it's so funny because this tier list is all just variants. But these are the top 3 decks being Magnezone, Miraidon, Altaria, Gourgeist, and Sceptile. These are the top 3 decks in the game. And then there's the 3 versions that are very similar, but just, I think, objectively a little bit worse. So they're just going to be on the tier below. Does that make sense? Are we okay with that? And they're going to go top of A tier. So that's just how I'm going to do that. Okay. I think it looks better. But anyway, like all of these decks are, that's the metagame. That's kind of how things look, to be honest. Yeah. Okay, anyway, moving forward, let's talk about Altaria Greninja. This video is getting long. It's gonna be an hour-long tier list. Altaria Greninja kind of people forgot about it. Where is it? The 23rd most played deck, and it's 64 to 66. So I guess it's not even doing that well, which is a little bit unfortunate, or fortunate, no matter how you look at it, I guess. This is a spicy deck playing Levitate Giratina with Meloetta, which is kind of crazy. I kind of like it, anyway, yeah, Greninja, Altaria typically plays Chingling, I think, and you play like Lucky Egg, like that was the version of like the previous seasons. Let's see if we can find that somewhere here. What about this at the Dingus Cup? Yeah, here's a more standard version, I guess, with Lucky Egg and whatnot. This is certainly a strong deck, but again, like I think just if you're gonna be playing like a high roll type strategy, I think there's probably just other better decks to play. I'm glad personally that the Altaria Greninja with Lucky Egg didn't become like a top tier deck in the metagame. Also, like you kind of lose to other Chingling decks, and this is a deck that doesn't really deal with sleep very well, and sleep's been popular so far this season. You know, it's definitely not bad. Not bad at all. I don't know if I really want to put this in the A tier. I think Sleep Altaria and Iron Valiant version are probably better, just in terms of like general playability. But you know what? It probably does deserve like to be in the A tier. But you know what? We'll just put it here in the B tier. Okay, we'll separate it out from those other A tier decks, which I think are all like very solid. Although we do have Blaziken and Greninja in the A tier, which I am noticing, which is crazy. So maybe we'll put it right up here. How about that? How about this? We'll put Sleep above the Greninja decks, even though its win rate hasn't been great. I think it's still really strong. It's really hard to decide exactly where these decks should go. But yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it like this. You know what? And I'm actually going to move double mag. I'm going to move it down. So we're going to do this. How about that? So Altaria and Greninja is actually, I think, pretty similar to Blaziken Greninja in terms of like overall goodness. But Sleep Altaria, I think, is just sort of stronger, even though it's hardly more counterplayed. Although it could go below them, but we'll put it above it. And then we just have these other decks. How about that? I don't know. We're on the fly here. We're doing our best, okay? We're doing our very best. Feel free to disagree. But this is just I'm just kind of feeling this out so far. You know what I mean? I think that the low A tier, B tier stuff is really all just kind of squeezed together. And it's hard to make like really strong inferences based around that data. But anyway, Altaria Greninja is going to go like low A tier. I think that's a good placement. What about Suicune and Baxcalibur? Are people playing this deck? Let's see here. It is all the way down as the 13th most played deck, which is crazy to me. That's insane. How come no one's playing Suicune Baxcalibur? People might just be bored of this, which is probably totally fine, and I do understand. 167 to 133, that's almost a 54% win rate. So again, I think Suicune Baxcalibur is still a top tier deck. I think it is. It's maybe a little bit scary with like all of the Miraidon Magnezone running around, but you know, at the end of the day, like being able to just Chien-Pao snipe stuff and nobody's playing Poncho, like this is still so strong. This probably deserves to see more play so far this season. I'm actually pretty curious about the win rates here. The matchups, it's 15 and 14 into Miraidon Magnezone, but it is okay. But it is 7 and 19 into Magnezone Miraidon, so we got that right. So this is definitely a lot better into Suicune, so that also plays into a factor whether or not I like it. Beating Sleep, beating Sceptile, beating Altaria, beating Hydreigon, beating Zoroark. So that's, again, I'm a little bit terrified now looking at this data, and I kind of regret even pulling this up for you guys to look at. So as it turns out, Suicune Baxcalibur is beating effectively everything in the metagame other than Magnezone Miraidon. Please save us, Lord Oricorio. Yeah, I mean, this is something I haven't really thought about, but again, it is just so strong still. And to be honest with you guys, like this is the sauce. Like this is still a top tier deck. Where do we put it? Do we also put it S tier? Would that be hilarious to put Suicune in the S tier? I think I kind of forgot about it. It's so good though. It literally beats Altaria in all of the decks other than Magnezone Miraidon. That's crazy, dude. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. You guys can't stop me. Suicune S tier for life. I mean, that data is enough for me. Like I completely just wasn't really even considering it, but it's so good still. This is still such a strong deck. I'm going to put this in the S tier and people are going to get mad at me, but it really is. It's that guy. This is that guy. Suicune is the man still. Absolutely incredible stuff. That's how I feel about that. Like legitimately, like this is crazy. Juliana as well is kind of a spicy card in here to grab the Baxcalibur, which I do like. Still playing Field Blower. What did we cut in here? Did we cut a copycat? I don't even know. Maybe I think we cut Cyrus. Not even playing Cyrus in the deck, but who cares? Yeah, so we can Chien-Pao. Incredible. Just still so good. How are you gonna have 160 stat? Look at this, dude. Beating everything. It beats everything other than Magnezone or Oricorio, effectively. I guess it does lose to Lucario a little bit. 5-0 into Iron Valiant. 4-0 into Darktina. Oh, 1-3 into Fluttermane. I'm afraid. But yeah, beating Sceptile very well, which is crazy. Beating Altaria, Gourgiest, beating Hydreigon, dude. Beating Zoroark. Oh my gosh, I'm a little bit afraid now. Let's cut that. Can we cut that out? I forgot I edit my own videos. Wow. Okay. All right. There we go. Suicune in the S tier. I actually feel good about that. Next up is what? Meowscarada. Okay, let's talk about Meowscarada here. We got to wrap this up, dude. It's going to be a long one. Meowscarada is the 10th most played deck this season, 191 to 187. So again, it's a very respectable deck. It was definitely sort of the niche pick version of Sceptile last season, but it was actually very respectable last season. I think there's a kind of a clear separation at this point, given all of the other things in the metagame. If I was going to play a grass deck, I think I would rather just play Sceptile, but Meowscarada is definitely still a very, very solid deck list. Does it deserve? The question is, are we putting this in A tier, or are we just going to kind of give it that B tier nod is the question. It's a weird thing to contemplate, right? Because technically it is just sort of Sceptile, but like not as good, you know? And like, you know, we already have a Sceptile S tier and we have one A tier. Like, should we also put Meowscarada A tier? I kind of don't feel that confident about it. I'm just going to put it like high B tier. And I think some people might be disappointed in that. But listen, like it's probably A tier quality. Especially considering we put Iron Valiant also in the A tier. Should we even? I think I'm actually going to recategorize these. I'm going to put Iron Valiant and Meowscarada top of B tier. And the reason why I'm going to separate them is because we already have a better version of Future Cybox Iron Valiant, which is Altaria. So I'm just going to put that here in the A tier. And then Meowscarada, which I think is also probably like pretty A tier in quality. I'm just going to put it in the top of B tier. You know what? I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna put Magnezone down here as well. I'm gonna cut the latter bottom half of A tier because we had too many decks in the A tier in my mind, and we're gonna just throw them into the B tier because that's what the B tier is all about. It's just about solid decks, but there's better options that are very similar, and that's what we're gonna do here. So Meowscarada, Iron Valiant, Magnezone, and Lucario here are all gonna be like the top B tier representations, and I kind of feel good about that. We're moving around a lot, but that's how I'm feeling there. So Meowscarada, top of B tier. Again, top of B tier is very good. Totally good. Don't feel disrespected by that. Shout out to Meowscarada. We love to see it. What's next? Hydreigon. Hydreigon is the 5th most played deck this season, and guess what? It's gone 360 to 325. And yeah, you already know Hydreigon's going to be quite good here. Here's an example. I don't think it's really changed much. Luckily, I don't think it really makes sense to play any of these new Pokemon in Hydreigon, which is a good thing. In my mind, we don't really need more Hydreigon buffs. And Zoroark, to me, is sort of, you know, kind of the more popular. It's not even the more popular version, as we saw in the data here, which is kind of scary. Zoroark's down here at the 9th most played deck, but also has a very respectable win rate. You know what? And what I'm going to probably do on this tier list is put Hydreigon and Zoroark right next to each other. I do want to take a look at these matchup spreads real quick, just to kind of see. Kind of losing to, again, yeah, losing to Sceptile, which makes sense, and it also loses to Zoroark. So that to me just tells me, you know what? I'm gonna put Zoroark above Hydreigon on this tier list. And let's take a look at a Zoroark example, because I really like Zoroark. But again, they're so similar, man. They're so similar, and grass is so popular. It's so strong that like just being entirely weak to grass just doesn't really feel that great. And that's why I'm still glad we got these grass type buffs and we can get these dark type decks in under check, because otherwise I think they would be very, very good. The unfortunate part truly about the whole scope of this metagame is that all of the psychic type decks in play are not weak to dark. They're weak to steel because Altaria is not weak to dark. So that's the weird part, I think, about these dark type Pokemon. But yeah, Hydreigon, Zoroark, both very, very strong. To me, these are clear like A tier contenders. Now, where in the A tier do we want to put them? I think right like smack dab in the middle, in fact, is where I want to put them. I'm going to put them right here above Sleep Altaria and the Greninja stuff, but below kind of the other 3 like lesser versions of the top decks is kind of where I'm getting at here. But as I said, Hydreigon, very, very good. However, it's more of like a pub stomper deck. It's a gatekeeper deck. It just beats everything that's bad, but loses to a lot of things that are good, including Suicune, Sceptile, and that's why it also loses to Zoroark. So that's why I think Zoroark is going to fit right here, just above Hydreigon. The 2 dark type Mega Absol decks, certainly still very, very strong meta contenders. They're going to top tournaments. They're going to win tournaments, but I don't really consider them to be as strong at the very, very top as maybe some of these other decks. So Zoroark technically above Hydreigon, but both of them are going to be really solid, like middle core A tier. Anyway, there we go. What a long video today. Next up is going to be Giratina and Darkrai, which shout out to Giratina. Darkrai is still seeing play somewhere. Let's find this here. Let's pull it up. Where is it? It's the 14th most played deck this season, 128 to 122. So a little, you know, it's winning more than it's losing, which is a good thing. I don't know. It did win, I think, the last tournament of last season, which is pretty funny. This is a crazy deck here. What am I looking at? So they've kind of thrown in Iron Jugulus and Greninja into Darktina. Is that actually what people are playing here? What is this? Let's take a look at the number 2 example, which is the indeed more standard version. Although let's go back to that other deck because that was sick. This is a cool deck. I don't know if this is something people are playing, but this is my first time seeing this. I really like this. But yeah, I mean, I think Giratina Darkrai is fine. Iron Jugulus Greninja sounds hilarious. That sounds actually kind of incredible. Yeah, what do we think, I guess, about Giratina Darkrai? I think it's totally good. I think it's just a very, very nice deck in the metagame. I don't know if it's like incredibly well positioned into like anything popular. Let's take a look at its matchup. So losing to Sleep Altaria, loses to Sceptile, loses to Miraidon Magnezone, or Magnezone Miraidon because of Oricorio, I would imagine. Loses to Hydreigon, loses to Meowscarada for sure. We knew that would be the case. Yeah, all right. Okay. So, all right. I mean, I think the win rate's also a little bit like kind of suspect for Giratina Darkrai. Are we going to put in the B tier? I'm thinking like a low B tier, like just a bottom B tier. We're just going to kind of throw them in there. I think it's probably better than C tier, although I do realize at this point that we have no decks in the C tier and we probably need to change that. Let's do this. Like, because Fluttermane was so much worse than Kingambit, I'll put Kingambit C tier. Is there anything in the B tier that we want to move down into the C tier? Maybe Sleep Lucario. Would that be funny? Let's do it. Let's just put Sleep Lucario down here into the C tier because it's also really bad this season. So let's do that, and we'll keep Flutter Snipe here with Greninja in the very bottom. How about that? Look at this tier list. Very top heavy, but you know, that's what the meta is, to be honest. Kind of hilarious. Anyway, on the fly here, yeah, Giratina Darkrai, we'll just go bottom B tier with that. I think that's fine. I don't know if anyone's gonna be super, you know, hung up about Giratina Darkrai. But what about Dark Greninja? This is a deck that's kind of fallen off a bit in terms of people just aren't really playing it. Where is it? Is it even... Oh, the 28th most played deck, and it's only 21 people have played it, and they've gone 44 and 51. So not looking great, in fact, for Dark Greninja. I wonder why that is. Maybe there's just better things to play. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't do well into grass. I don't know. I haven't played this deck, like, on like the ranked ladder or in tournament or anything like in forever. I don't even remember the last time I played this deck, but that's because I don't really see that many people playing it. Last season, it did see a little bit of play. In fact, it was actually quite decent into certain things, but kind of, again, left to the wayside here. What was the stats on this? Again, nobody's really playing this, and it has a 45% win rate. Unfortunately, I'm actually going to be also putting this into the C tier. I think that's just probably a C tier deck. Unfortunately, at least based around its performance so far this season, and because nobody really has even played it so far this season, I don't really expect it to be that relevant moving forward either. So that's probably where the C tier is going to go. C tier and below are decks that are probably just going to stop seeing play as the season goes on. But let's talk about something to wrap up this video because we're an hour in. Let's talk about Scizor, because the thing about Scizor is that it's actually seeing quite a bit more play just really recently. And let's take a look at this, because so far this season, just looking at the entire scope of things, it's the 30th most played deck, which is appropriate because it's the last thing that we're highlighting. However, it is 64 and 41, which is absolutely incredible. Now, the thing about Steel is that, you know what, like we can beat Altaria, which is crazy, but 8 and 4 into Miraidon Magnezone is impressive. 4 and 9 into Sceptile is a little bit scary, but 6 and 2 into Sleep Altaria, 5 and 3 into this, 3 and 5 though into Gourgiest Altaria is tough, 5 and 2 into Koraidon, 3-0 into Hydreigon. Actually really, really nice, although it is losing to some random fire type decks, and also, I guess, Iron Valiant, which is crazy. But here's the thing, like if we go to the current tournaments, like today, as an example, like literally started a couple hours ago, is the Umbreon Tuesday's Meltdown tournament with like, what was this, 234 players? Look at this metagame. Like it's up here. It's one of the most played decks, and it's 19 and 14 so far in this tournament. So I think that with all of the extra Altaria seeing play, I actually think that this Scizor deck has some more potential than let's take a look at Nemu's deck here. Like this, okay, this is yeah, I mean, listen, I actually really like Scizor. It's one of my favorite like Pokemon in the game. Just never really caught ground. It just wasn't something that a lot of people considered playing. But, you know, you can just one-hit KO Altaria, which is like kind of crazy. And I think Revavroom is pretty cool, and we got the Scyther U-turn stuff in here. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Scizor could end up being like a top 10 archetype this season, just purely based around its ability to perform into Altaria as well as like Miraidon Magnezone. So it's kind of the dark horse here. One thing that is sort of cropping up really recently, I think after this weekend, but everything sort of prior to this weekend, it hasn't really been around. Like I said, it's the 30th most played deck, so it's just barely warranting even like a consideration on the tier list, but I actually kind of like it. So let's talk about Scizor. Let's rank it. Let's put it where we think it'll be, you know, this time next week or like moving forward, which I actually think is, again, a very respectable place for this deck list. I'm going to put this probably high B tier. I'm going to put it high B tier. I'm going to squeeze this in. I'm going to put it right here below, you know, Meowscarada. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put it above this Mag variant because I really just don't. I would recommend you don't play this version of Magnezone, even though it is somewhat good. I'm going to put it right here, like solid high B tier. with the other guys, which I think is probably fine. You know what? And like, I feel that way about Scizor. I think it's actually going to come back. It's going to have a little bit of a resurgence. It's going to do some stuff this season. What do you guys think of this tier list? And how are you having a good time? Was this a good video for you guys? I know this is a long one, but you know, it's interesting because I share my thoughts about decks all of the time, but like as soon as I get onto the tier list and I start to rank them, I really have a hard time like deciding on where I think decks should go. So that's why these videos take such a long time, but I actually really enjoy it. And again, these are basically like the 30th most played decks in this current season, and this is how I feel about them like moving forward. To summarize, I think that Magnezone Miraidon is just like a top dog. I think Altaria is a top dog, and I think that Sceptile is a top dog. The thing is, I think that double mag is just better into double Miraidon, so that's why it's going to be in the S tier. Altaria Gourgiest is still super consistent and incredibly strong, and you don't lose to stuff that counters sleep, which we love. So that's why it's S tier. The Iron Valiant version is also really good, but in my mind, probably just a little bit worse, but we could be wrong about that moving forward. Sceptile Chingling, incredible, but also is Sceptile and Pheromosa. I just think that the Chingling version is a bit better, so that's why that's S tier, and this one is A tier. And then we threw Suicune in the S tier because I think it's massively slept on, and I think it is probably a top deck in the game right now, and considering that it beats a lot of the other top decks is really strong. As we get into the A tier, we got the Dark Mega Absol decks, which are still really good, but you know, not S tier material quite yet, or at least at the moment, and I think Zoroark beats Hydreigon, so that's why it's above it. Then at the end of A tier, we've got the Greninja decks, which are fine, and then Sleep Altaria, which is being hard counterplayed right now, and is definitely on the big decline, but is still one of the stronger decks in the game, so that's why all three of these are going to go in the bottom A tier. And then B tier. B tier is basically all of the fighting decks, which I think are just not well positioned currently, and then everything else that just has like a better version of it higher up in the standings, right? Like that's kind of where these decks fall. Meowscarada is just sort of probably a less good version of Sceptile. Iron Valiant's certainly very good, but just play Altaria Valiant. You know, Magnezone EX, just play Magnezone Miraidon without Magnezone EX. Terrapagos is fine. Scizor is fine. Giratina Darkai is fine. These Blaziken variants, again, it's just probably better to play Blaziken Greninja, unfortunately, but they're definitely not terrible, which is why all these decks are in the B tier. That's what the B tier is all about. And then C tier is Sleep Lucario, which has really struggled this season and is not seeing a lot of play. Dark Greninja also struggling and not really seeing any play. And then Gambit, which is seeing a bit of play but has struggled tremendously. And then we have Fluttermane Greninja, which is by far the lowest win rate out of any of the decks. So that's why it's going there in the D tier. And that's the tier list, guys. That's the tier list. Guess what? We're almost to 50,000 subscribers. I think we need like 800 more subs. So if you're watching this video, you know, go ahead, like give me the nod. Press that subscribe button and just like hop along for the ride because we're almost at 50K and that's pretty cool. Definitely go register for PMPT number 34, which is this coming weekend. Let's see if these predictions are somewhat accurate at all. I think they are, actually. I'm feeling pretty good about this tier list. You guys will probably tear me apart in the comments and disagree, but I feel good about this. This is one of the better tier lists I've ever seen. It's becoming more and more hard to rank these decks because there are so many decks similar to other decks, and there's so many decks that are so good in Pokemon Pocket, which is why I try to move things around in a weird way. And that's why the structure of this might look a little bit strange, but it's all just my reasoning. And at the end of the day, like any of these things that are B tier and above are actual like meta decks. They're very strong and could easily win at any given time. So the margins are very thin. So that's kind of how it is. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Like and subscribe. Register for PMPT 34. I'm going to get out of here. Long video. Peace out. Have a good one, guys. We'll do another tier list in like a couple weeks whenever ranked comes out. We'll do like an updated tier list, which should be fun. Yeah, it's going to be a weird season. It's a weird one. It's a strange. Comment down below about what your thoughts are about this season's metagame and like what you think about it, because I would love to hear your comments. But anyway, I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Have a good one, guys. Yep. Bye.